Francis Causey is a CNN senior producer, TED contributor, and Emmy-Award-winning director of the documentary film The Long Shadow, which traces her family's legacy of white supremacy and privilege and investigates her own ancestor, whose critical role in the creation of American laws kept slavery and later the Black Codes and Jim Crow a core element of American society for centuries to come. On this episode of Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, she tells us what she discovered while making the movie and what she learned about herself and about America. This episode originally aired December 1st, 2021.
Oops, wrong one. Hang on. There we go. Good afternoon, good morning, good midday, good day to everybody. Good to see everybody once again back with Race Talk Revolution. Can you believe it's December 1st? Man, and it just keeps flowing and growing. So welcome to another episode of Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, where your voice matters. I want to thank you once again for joining us this afternoon. And for those of you who are new, welcome. And we ask that you continue to show up and come on back. Man, today we have a really good episode. Our speaker today is Emmy Award-winning director Francis Causey. Her documentary titled The Long Shadow follows her as she uncovers a family legacy of white supremacy traced back to her ancestor, Edmund Pendleton, who was one of this country's founding fathers and the first governor of Virginia. She will share her story and what it was like making that movie. Now, as always, my brothers and sisters, during our conversation, we ask that you please remain muted. And when we get to the Q&A section of the podcast or the show, we will instruct you on how to raise your hand. And as usual, we also want to remind you that Race Talk Revolution is a loving, inclusive platform designed to strip away the false beliefs that keep us separated as species, uncover the not so hidden truth that we all want the same things in life, and to heal the wounds created by systemic racism. Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of systemic racism while together growing our capacity for effective anti-racist activism. The Race Talk Revolution community is committed to practicing radically inclusive love. So what that means is when we do not understand or agree with what's being shared, we are still committed to listening with respect, listening with appreciation and empathy. It is our commitment here at Race Talk Revolution that every person be encouraged and heard and appreciated. Because here on Race Talk Revolution with Lane and Eugene, every voice matters. And here's my co-host, the Reverend Lane Cobb.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. And I have the privilege of introducing our guest. Francis Causey is a CNN senior producer, TED contributor, and Emmy Award-winning director of the documentary The Long Shadow, which traces her family's legacy of white supremacy and privilege and investigates her own ancestor, whose critical role in the creation of American laws kept slavery and later the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws a core element of American society for centuries to come. Along with producer Sally Holst, Causey passionately seeks the hidden truth and the untold stories of how the United States of America, guided by the South's powerful racial political influence, steadily, deliberately, and at times secretly established white supremacy and privilege in our institutions, our laws, our culture, and our economy. Ms. Causey, welcome to Race Talk Revolution.
Thank you so much. Eugene and Lane, I'm privileged to be here in the right way. Privileged to be here, it's a great turnout. Very happy to see so many white faces because we've really been since the film. I was just sharing with the reverends that it's been an interesting journey since we released this film, and I never really understood, and you can't until you get in the mix of this very important what should be an issue of national discussion and importance, instead of kind of one-offs that are kind of pegged to the news and usually negative headlines, that there were so many folks that really weren't aware of their implied bias, their unconscious bias. They're 25 to 30, honestly, probably 25 to 30% of the country that maybe even if they saw my film wouldn't be swayed by it. And then there are a lot of folks, maybe some of you here, who just really weren't aware of what we as a nation, institutionally, structurally, had done and continue to do to Africans, later, earliest Africans, and then later African Americans. That this issue has been so swept under the carpet for so long, most Americans don't even know it's a problem. Or if they, I think most Americans wouldn't be until recently swayed to do something about it. So I assume that if you're on this Zoom, you care deeply about it, and I would be delighted to take any questions. Don't leave anything on the table. Put it in the chat. Believe me, chances are I've heard it. So don't be afraid to ask whatever questions you'd like.
Well, I want to ask a question, and this might sound stupid, but what prompted you to do this piece of work? What prompted you?
No, it's actually the most frequent question we get, and it's not stupid, it's great. What prompted me to, out my own family and, which I've incurred some wrath, and what incentivized me to tell this story, which I made the film, Lane, that I could not find, which was a film about how white privilege, of course, there is no white supremacy, right? Because white is not superior to Black, but I wanted to in a very cogent, fair, even-handed way, really string together in one sitting for folks what it meant to be white in this country and how it disadvantaged Africans and later African Americans. I mean, not just disadvantaged, violently doing whatever whites could to keep this system in place. And of course, we still have, because we haven't made it a national importance. We don't have the National Commission yet to study the impact of slavery and Jim Crow. I hope all on this call will support HR 40. But we need a national commission. We need it televised, and people need to understand that there is still discrimination taking place, whether it's in housing, education, the economy. So we still have the legal discrimination, de facto legal discrimination. We only legally outlawed it in 1964. So it was obvious to me as a nose on my face as a child and I talk about it a little bit in the movie, that something was wrong. I could see, I came at it with a child's perspective of hurt, seeing, of course, the hurt that I was experiencing was about 1 million times less than what I saw in my life. And that was primarily through the people, as I say, who worked for my family. I mean, the South is and continues to be a really, really difficult place because of the economic apartheid and the effects of that economic apartheid. It's in the whole country, and I hope folks got that from the movie, right? So what you have people like my uncle, right, who were already by the late 1700s. It was already clear from the economic system that was built on the backs of the enslaved, and starting with the indentured that they eventually did not free. The whites got freed indentured, but the Black folk didn't. And then the creation of whiteness, right? So and this concoction, this construct, if you will, to continue to perpetuate this system. And I was like, this is wrong. I could see the other side of the tracks, I could see and as I got older, I was able to kind of, and I became a journalist, and I'm quite certain it's why I became a journalist. I mean, I make films about mental justice, economic justice, which is documentary kind of style. But I'm certain that experience of growing up and the sadness that I felt for these folks in my life, there were some incidences that I didn't really go into in The Long Shadow just for issues of time, but I did address those in my TED Talk. So if you go to TED.com and search my name, I talk about growing up and some of the things that I witnessed, and using of the N-word, and my grandmother, getting upset because Henry, the yard man, dared to cross her path in the living room, and it's like, oh my, it's like, as a child, I was like, that it was traumatizing, right? Again, pales into comparison what Henry or Mary Law or Gwen or any of the folks whom I loved growing up faced. But so, and then as I became a journalist, and Sally had grown up in Mississippi. It was the film we always knew we had to make. It wasn't a choice. We had to make it. And I was catalyzed by Ferguson, the paper that Richard Rothstein wrote about housing, and how housing played a role in Ferguson, and the municipal court system there is another thing he's written about, people like Eric Garland selling one cigarette, we know, right, about police brutality. We know about this disproportionate police brutality against African Americans. So I really wanted to connect the dots in one sitting, and happily, 4 years later, the film is going as strong as it ever has. So, and we're not going anywhere. We're going to keep plugging away.
Thank you so very much. I have a question for you. What was it like for you to find out that one of your relatives not only owned slaves, but was one of the country's founding fathers who engineered the support of slavery into the Declaration of Independence?
Right. Thank you, Eugene. And it was tragic to me. It empowered me to continue to make the film, because I had known about my family's history. If any of you are on the call from the South, the South is obsessed with genealogy. And I had known a little bit about Edmund Pendleton's life. There was actually and in my research, there's not a lot of research on him, because he was really a scholar. He was a judge. He was an attorney. I mean, he was the guy that he was George Washington's lawyer. Thomas Jefferson came to him and said, Thomas Jefferson said, make sure, again, on the down low in dog whistle, make sure that the other slave owners in the North know that slavery, we want to make American law. We want to put slavery into American law, right? And so I hope folks get. I didn't finish my thought in the last question, but that these ideas that the South had around the enslaved economy, it was huge by the 1810s, 1820s, and Edmund and my family were a part of that. In fact, where I'm sitting on the steps, that columned building is on the National Trust for Historic Places. It's in between Richmond and Charlottesville. That's the Pendleton ancestral home. And there are many of the the folks who, were enslaved by the Pendletons that are buried there. I went there. I saw that the cemetery was overgrown. And I read a book about Edmund that, incidentally, this shows you how deep this racial violence goes in our history. There was a Pulitzer Prize winning book for history written, I believe, in 1952 by a guy named Edmund Mays. He wrote about Edmund Pendleton because he's not very well known. And the guy who wrote the book was the ringleader of one of the most notorious lynchings in Virginia history. In 1957. This is a guy who wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book about Edmund and for history. So I was shocked, I was saddened, but I was more interested in rolling up my sleeves and understanding how my own flesh and blood, what motivated him, how he did it, why he did it, and really kind of calling him out. And hopefully, and I don't know if this has really been the result, but it's like, hopefully people were encouraged by that. And if you have, I never encourage anyone, if it's not safe, to confront their own family members or to talk with their own family members. We can provide you with we have a study guide. We have a 15-minute version. If you need any kind of material, chances are, we have a trailer, anything that you might need to really talk to your own family members about some of their unconscious or overt bias, we've got it. That's a very long answer.
Well, that's a good answer. One of the things that strikes me is that you don't pull any punches, right? Your conversation is very straight, and you certainly didn't pull any punches with that movie, right? So even though I know what the history is, and you talked about the violence and how bloody it is, we have to force ourselves to look at it. One of the things that as you say, I believe in your opener, was that Americans don't want to look at our history. White Americans in particular do not want to look at their history. And if we don't come to grips with the history, nothing will happen. And so is that one of the things that you hope to accomplish with the movie, is to put it in people's face and to create some change in that way? And if that is so, is it working? What are you feeling?
Well, great question. Another one, great question. So I really wanted to tangibly show people follow the money with employment, economics, and education, right? So I think one of the most powerful things, like when you talk to somebody, if you're going to change hearts and minds, you have to make it tangible to people and to white folks, right? And that's one thing white folks know is money, and they don't like sharing it. So I'm like, okay, dude, if you're like, so my family had the benefit of home ownership. Not a lot of folks know that because there's no generational wealth transfer in the African-American community, you can't build housing wealth. Okay, well, if you can't really get that, maybe you could understand Social Security, that this was denied to the two prime Black vocations of the era, sharecropping and domestic service. Right. And so and I get a lot of people, Lane, that say to me, well, I'm a working class person. My folks didn't own my family didn't own slaves. And I'm like, well, did your grandfather own a house? Did your grandfather work? You benefited. And I'm not talking about huge wealth transfer, right? Maybe you got a beat up car that enabled you to get to community college. Right? Maybe you inherited $1,000 or something, right? And folks don't really understand for every $1 an African-American has in our country, a white person has $10. That's a huge disparity. You look at health outcomes. I mean, you name it, it's there. And so I wanted to make it tangible for folks in a way that they understood. Now, one side note, if you read Ian Haney Lopez's book, Dog Whistle Politics, right? One of the things it's been really hard for people to understand is that just like in 1680 or 1750, you have the elite really scapegoating people who can't speak for themselves widespread on a societal level, right? Whether it's marginalized folks, whether it's African Americans, Latino, Native Americans, right? And so you see the elite scapegoating these folks for the problems that are in the country, right? You see it with immigration, you see it everywhere, economics, right? And so folks, the elites in our country have been, in the leadership, I think have been, if you read Ian Haney, he says it much more eloquently than I do, but they kind of diverted our attention away from all of these things because they want to keep government deregulated. They want to keep making huge amounts of money. So let's divert from, the fact that the Kentucky Fried Chicken manager who's an assistant manager. It should be a paid managerial. You work 40 hours a week. You get paid time. You get paid time off. Let's talk about the yellow people, the brown people invading. I mean, let's stir up that kind of stuff to kind of detract from what's happening. And those kind of issues also disproportionately impact communities of color. And I made a movie about that, which I hope you'll check out on YouTube. It's called Heist: Who Stole the American Dream? And I really go back into politically, Lane and Eugene and folks. We go back and look at in the 70s the creation of a lot of what we're dealing with today politically, how it came about, the deregulation of the media. There's a lot of clues about what we're dealing with today in that movie.
Without a doubt.
Whew, good stuff. Couple of things here. I have a question to ask, but I wanted to, where did it go? Somebody was asking if for those of people who are with the YouTube channel, would you suggest posting a trailer?
I think our trailer is on YouTube, but
Okay.
if it's not, is that what you're asking, Eugene?
Yes.
Let me see. I will make a note to do that.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's probably somewhere. Yes. Oh, yes. We can get you whatever you want. But if you search for Francis Causey Films or my name, I think it should come up, or The Long Shadow. But if it's not, I apologize. We'll get it up there.
Okay.
A whole lot of stuff comes up when we search you. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So one of the scholars in the movie, one of the scholars made a statement. He said, "I feel like we are still fighting the Civil War and the South is winning." What's your take on that statement?
Yeah, and that's a part of that other question I didn't ask or didn't answer that Lane had, and John Powell is such a powerful man and such a brilliant scholar, and he's just amazing. So it's complicated, right? When you see what Ms. Stacey Abrams did in Georgia, and you see the demographic shift. So the South has been very, very organized around this alleged, what they think is white racial supremacy, right? Going back to the Dixiecrats, going all the way up to the Southern Strategy with Lee Atwater and Richard Nixon, and even Bill Clinton. I mean, I as a journalist, I never, when I ran the national desk for CNN, every couple of years or maybe every year, the political unit would come in and kind of take over the network, and I'd go have a day off, right? Because I really don't like politics, because it's so, you can manipulate so much, and I'm just this earnest, live with my heart wide open kind of person. But so what you see is manipulation of this race card to get votes. And it happens in the Democratic Party with this bullshit law and order, which is code word, for racial discrimination, racial violence. Hillary Clinton used it with super predators. So you see politicians on both sides of the aisle play on this terrible, terrible history and its remnants that are still happening today. And, now they play upon it because they're so powerful. They want to get reelected. A lot of stuff happens in the primaries. It doesn't happen, it doesn't happen after the elections take place. But this is at the core, the DNA of who we are as Americans. It's like a cancer, right? And so it's a cancer might affect one part of your body, but it could spread to the rest of it. And that's what's happened in our country. And as I said at the beginning, it's so I don't think the South is winning. Let me say that. I think they're winning less and less, right? But if you go to the South, you'll see that what they think locally, and there's still so much discrimination. It's very hard for me to go back to the South. Is still there, and like they're digging in their heels, right? The people I grew up with and went to the private white segregated academy, they really aren't growing much because they're isolated, right? And the mind, is a tricky thing. I think when those values and when social media is used for good, and you see what Ms. Abrams did, and you start to get a different narrative coming out of the South, and people know more what's happening in the South. And more importantly, I think folks from the Northeast going to live in the South, right? Infiltrating the South, if you will, because of the lower cost of living, those kind of things. I mean, I think you're seeing, and of course that can be used in a negative way too, with redistricting, et cetera, gerrymandering. But I think they're winning. To answer your question, I think they're winning less. But it's still a huge problem. And I know, from what I speak, is trying to get my film shown in the South, almost impossible. I had the Memphis PBS programmer tell me, oh, well, no, Black folks have moved on, Black folks don't care and white folks have moved on. So we were not accepted into film festivals in the South. So in that way, we are either stuck or losing ground. But I think nationally, we're trying to marginalize the South more, I hope.
So if you guys,
and what it's really about too, Gene, is about money. And I said to the reverends before we came on, what we do at the Long Shadow is any licensing we make, we put it in the form. We turn those around in the form of reparations grants to African Americans, right? This is really, there's no more hand wringing. Certainly after you watch my film and you believe the film is fair and it's correct. And I've never had one person challenge one fact in my film, which is really the proudest thing, I think, is that we've got to have a generational wealth transfer into the African American community. We can do it. We did it with COVID. You don't have to do it all at once, but and you start to see local, state folks doing some of that. But we've got to get money, capital into the hands of the African American community. And then if we start to see that, if we start to see standard of livings for African Americans in the South increase, then I'll start to feel a lot better. Because I every time I go to the South, I drive my car around, all those neighborhoods, and we still got work to do.
Yeah, you just answered the question I was going to ask. Go ahead, Lane.
No, that is the question, right? It is about reparations and wondering what reparations looks like, right? What does it actually look like? So what you said is, yeah, we have to get money into those hands. How does that happen?
Well, it happens. We just gave a grant to a elderly, I won't say elderly, she's 60s, in the Houston area, who's perfect example, had a catering job that was the pandemic impacted. She was taking care of her 2 grandkids. And, I think I know we did. We made like $1,000 grant to her. So you can find, and Nick Lane, if you'll ask Nick, he will send you, or Eugene, he will send you the name of several. I wish my producer is not here, and he's usually loading all this stuff into the chat, but we have several organizations that are identifying or can help you identify GoFundMe campaigns, et cetera. If you read stuff in the press, a lot of times, they're putting a hyperlink in. In this instance, we found this woman through a New York Times link. I'm like, oh, she'd be a great person to give and she was also hit with the Houston storms. She lost her home in the Houston, so she had a double whammy, the pandemic and then the flooding. So Nick can pass that along if you want to, in a subsequent email to him, just get the names of those groups. Okay, so on a state level, you're seeing, on a local level, you're seeing it, for instance, in Evanston, Illinois. The local council there, city council, voted to give a certain amount of money to Black residents of Evanston who, in order to help them refurbish their homes, right? They have some, I mean, you can think it's easy to vet. It's easy to vet these folks in this way of doing things, to identify folks. For instance, here's an example of it going south, not literally south, but going wrong, is the Biden administration identified that during the Trump administration, PPP, right, which was distributed by mainstream banks to small businesses, was not getting in the hands of Black business owners because, for very good reason, Black business owners and Black homeowners have been targeted over generations with onerous, terrible ninja loans that they were not able to get out from under. So they don't, a lot of small Black businesses are started through the business owner's own resources or through family and friends, bookshops, garage mechanics, things like that. And so Steve Miller, who's the architect of Trump's immigration policy, just carpet bombs the country with lawsuits on something like what Biden did. Is Biden directed his administration to make sure that the CARES Act went into the hands of African Americans and business owners, and Miller sued to saying that was discriminatory. Now, here's the big takeaway. What really enrages me and makes me laugh out loud, and this is one for your family members that you're struggling to maybe talk about, for over 400 years, we have discriminated against African Americans and Africans on the basis of their race. And I think race is a concoction also. I mean, the human Homo sapiens came out of Africa, for God's sakes. But why can't we do reparations, and why can't we right these wrongs by using race, right? And so this has got to play out in the court system, right? We know that it's happening. It has happened. It continues to happen, rightfully so, with education, which eventually will lead to evening, leveling the playing field more. But in terms of reparations, it's just blatantly discriminatory and unfair. I mean, I say this you're an American, right? If you truly know this history and its impact on the present, Black codes, slavery, Jim Crow, it's like, which is again the cornerstone of the film. This is just absolutely un-American on one level. On another level, it's absolutely American.
Yes.
Right? But this history and its impact is something that the African American community should not bear the burden of alone. We cannot ask them to endure this violence and insult and discrimination, and then ask them to somehow get themselves out of it, right? So I see myself, and perhaps the other white folks on the call could see yourself as a white ally to a Black-led movement, right? You can go to Black Lives Matter, and those organizers or whatever groups like this support this kind of group in their actions. Those folks that are activists, they've got to get their cars fixed. They need groceries. They get, support the Black-led movement. I don't at all begin to think that I have the answers, but I am your ally in the Black community, and I am working on your behalf because it is wrong. It is just plain wrong what has been done and continues to be done, and that really offends me. And I think protest is the highest form of patriotism.
Thank you. I feel like you answered a lot of the questions that we might still have for you. I mean, one of them was really about that backlash when you talk about leveling the playing field, right, which you talk about in the movie also, every time the attempts at leveling the playing field, then this terrible backlash, and we end up back,
That's right.
where we were when we started. What is going to be the solution here, right? And there is that anti-Black sentiment. There is that fear, that latent fear of Black people, right? So we have, I have two questions, like, what is the solution, and why do you think that white people fear Black people even now? Like in your movie, you talked about the Haitian rebellion, right? And the white people were afraid that their slaves were going to kill them, so that they, cracked down on legislation to, all of that. What's going on now?
Well, so I just posted, or Nick posted on our Facebook page, a New York Times piece. Some of you may have read it, right? So I have often advocated taking from, and this is happening in places, taking from resource-rich school systems and putting them into less rich school systems, right? At the time I was, and still probably believe that, this particular school system is busing white and Black, getting them together. And I do think that's important. But it's the cornerstone of that backlash, that white backlash that you're talking about, Lane, is, okay, well, I'm for diversity. Here's where the rubber meets the road. I'm for diversity and all that stuff you're talking about until it affects me. Mm-hmm. That's where, if you give your money, you're putting your money where your mouth is, right? And so the changing of the hearts and minds, a lot of it, the subtle, unconscious messaging that we get from this national narrative. It's one of the reasons I made the film. I was just so pissed off seeing CNN's coverage of Ferguson, because it was just all this Black stereotypes. If we continue to perpetuate these stereotypes in the media, then people are going to, when a Black person walks by, or afraid they're going to shoplift, or that they're. It's crazy. It's just there's mass psychosis almost. I believe racism is hardwired into folks, and if you have all of this information that is either purposefully racist over the generations, or in what a lot of politicians have done, like I talk about with the Southern strategy, they're not blatant about it. And I think we owe Donald Trump a debt in some way, because what happened with once Mr. Obama was elected, it unleashed these terrible, violent animal spirits that had been in the soil, of our DNA for generations, right? And so that's why Donald Trump was elected, right? And I talk about it in the film, this fear of the other, that somehow this country, this vaunted, city on the hill, right? Our country is so, there's a lot of great things about our country. I just want African Americans to have the same opportunity that this country has afforded me. They should have the same opportunity. And that's not the case. So it's really one of the reasons it's so hard to feel like we're making progress. We are. It's tiny baby steps, and we need to have a wholesale, again, make it a national priority to study this issue. It's very difficult when you have a minority leader in the Senate saying, I don't see what the big deal is about my family never owned slaves, right? That is just inaccurate. His family maybe never did own slaves, but he sure benefited from the economy that was built around slavery. So by the time you get to 1810, 1820, the human cost, it's even hard to say it, but of this enslavement is so profitable. And there are great books in the study guide that I hope you'll distribute, if Nick can get it to you, about the roots of capitalism. It's like everything. In the enslavement of human beings outstripped all other forms of commerce in the United States by the time the cotton gin takes hold. And you start getting rice and indigo in the South. It moves out of the very quaint, the very kind of quaint Virginia, founding fathers like my family. You start to see it really emerge as this business, right? And then you look at slavery by another name, right? Convict leasing, right? Which is just enslavement all over again. You're rounding up people like Eric Garland. The sheriffs had these deals with corporations in Alabama, for instance, that they would just pick up African-American men for no reason on the street. So the sheriff had a piece of the action, would sell these folks to corporations, and they would work in the mines, the coal mines, the mines in Alabama and across the South. It's no different than slavery, no different. And if your family, if you have any kind of roots in this country, chances are your family benefited from the enslavement of Africans and later the legal discrimination against African Americans.
Yeah, there's so much here, so much.
I hope it's not too much.
Oh no, this is great. This is really, really good.
Great. Great.
Before we get to the Q&A, there are a couple of more questions. I have one here that asks, Miss Causey, you in the film saying that white people need to understand that when there is equality or the equity, everybody wins. Are people responding to this message? And how are they responding to the message?
It's a great question. That's a great question. I think in a global way, people, certainly Americans, believe in that ideal, but when you really start to see the change, when you really start to ask them to make white folks to make personal sacrifices, it's a little harder. It's a little harder sell, but this is the thing that I hope Wall Street, and I did a business school. It might have been at my alma mater, UNC Chapel Hill, which, by the way, I would not have gotten into if I wasn't a white legacy there. I think we did a Zoom with them, or they might have backed out. This is right when critical race theory, this nonsense over critical race theory was being concocted. But I said to them, you have 35 to 40 million African American folks, right? Possibly more. We need to integrate them more and get them making more money and passing it on to that's a rising tide lifts all boats. I mean, you have this untapped source of intellectual potential. Because of the marginalization and because they've been so discriminated against. And again, I want to qualify it by saying it is phenomenal what African Americans have been able to accomplish in our society, considering what they've been up against. And I feel particularly for the older African Americans who have endured such trauma that it just know that someone thinks about you but this is an untapped source of our nation's potential. And so, a rising tide should lift all boats. And when the economy tanks, it shouldn't be first line communities of color that suffer, right? You have that from generation to generation, that whenever there's a downturn, the advances that have been made, we go back, we need to get that on solid ground. We need to get the economics with as wealthy as this country is, we also need to get white folks on more solid economic ground. And that's a problem, a disparity in capitalism, right? But so, yeah, I think you have to be willing to see things a different way. You have to be willing to connect the dots. And that's why I made the film.
Thank you so very much. So let's go ahead and get into the Q&A portion. Just real fast. Once again, we encourage everybody to ask questions. And how you do that, you want to raise your hand. And how you raise your hand on here is you go take your cursor down to the bottom of the page, to the right-hand side, lower right hand, and you see reactions. Click reactions, and then click the button that says raise hand. If that isn't there on the bottom of your screen, go to participants, second from the left. Click that arrow, click that and then find your name, and then click on the little three dots to the side of your name, and you should have the capability to raise your hand there.
And there's also, Eugene, may
yes.
I also say, I think there's some decent questions in chat. And I'll let you guys run the show. I'm used to running the show. I'm not going to direct it.
And I was just about to say, Allison asked a great question, and there are a lot of good questions in the chat there. And Allison, I have you on the list of people who are going to ask questions. So if you wouldn't mind coming on screen and asking your question, I have you second, actually. And if you don't want to do that, I'll go ahead and ask the question. But I have Gretchen, Allison, Judith, Sheila, Seja, and Colleen. So let me start with Gretchen.
Thank you very much. And thank you for, very thought-provoking film. Right off the top, you said something that intrigued me. I heard you say 30 to 35% of white Americans don't know. Is that your experience, and will you speak on it some? And as my African-American friends say, how could you not know? I'm old, so I remember Emmett Till. Right. How could you not know? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. So I believe that there are 30 to 35% of the country that are hardcore racists. That was that statistics. I believe if you look at the people that are not changing their mind in terms of politics, and these are the people that aren't, if they might be independent, or they might be Republicans, or they might be Democrats, for that matter. So I think they're just, if you look time and time again, the polls, the politicians seem to really go after that group of folk. And I think, they're people that are just gonna, I get this a lot, your film, everybody should be seen. Everybody should see your film, but probably the people who need to see it won't see it, won't seek it out, won't be willing to watch it. And I think those are the folks that I'm talking about. And I agree with you. You've got your head in the sand, if you don't understand that this is the core issue, not to dismiss what's going on with Native Americans and the Latino population. I get it. But what has happened to Africans and later African Americans in our country is unique. I don't think there's any question. I'm not saying one has suffered less or other, because it's hard to qualify that. But in terms of laws and structure, our enslavement of African Americans, no Africans, and later what we did to African Americans, no other country has come close to institutionalizing this than we have. You have apartheid in South Africa that lasted about 50 years. You have Brazil that kind of came close. There's some great scholarship on this from Dr. Gerald Horne, who's in our film. I'm another devotee of his. He just wrote an incredible book about the 1600s that really tees up how this whiteness really stems from England. It just won the American Book Award. So I hope you'll check that out too, and check out the books on our study guide. Great question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and ask Allison's question for her. She writes, you discuss the origins of racism in the South, but we see plenty of deeply embedded racism here in New York City area. Can you discuss racism in other areas of the United States of America?
Great question. And I hope what's apparent, Allison, is that the kernels of this, there's no question that, so you have an agrarian society in the South, heavily predicated on the enslavement of human beings, but you have obviously up in the North, in the founding parts of, the North. You have also insurance companies, Wall Street, that are benefiting from enslavement. You have obviously enslaved that are working in households, that are also working in agrarian. But what I wanted to convey in the film is that this spread. This is why I so wanted to go to Canada and meet the Starks, right? Because the Starks were enslaved in Missouri. The master, it's not even hard to say, sent them west to drive cattle, and they eventually won their freedom. They go to Canada. Canada needs citizens in its outer islands, Vancouver, and out west of Vancouver, to settle that area. And so these 900 pioneers go, and not far after the end of the Civil War, we begin to see the same racism that emanates in the South spread to the rest of the country, because we've got war, criminals that are leaving the South for the gold rush, right? So, and then of course, you know as well as I do, most on this call, the role that slavery played in the westward expansion of the country, right? So yes, the South started it, but it is every bit since the founding of our nation, first in the Northeast, and then as you spread west. So I stress the South because they continued this organized voting bloc around this erroneous notion of white supremacy, right? That's a contemporary thing, right, with the Dixiecrats. But as Professor Allen says, Dr. Allen says so beautifully in the film, the laws changed in the North, but you still had the custom of discrimination. And you in some cases, you had the poll taxes. I mean, you had the polling issues in the North. So the customs, unfortunately, very much continued. So yes, there's not one section of our country that's not steeped in this history and bears responsibility for it.
Yeah.
In fact, the Sons of the Confederacy, the largest chapter is in Santa Cruz, California. Now, part of that's a function of there are more hate groups in California than in any other state. Part of that's a function of how large it is. But the Sons of the Confederacy are just operating and still around and doing quite well in California.
Thank you. Allison, thank you for that question. Judith, you're up.
Thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you, Francis, for the work, for the passion, first of all, that you have put into bringing forth truth and honesty, because that's really what you have done. You've not only brought forth truth, but you brought forth honesty in the message of the history of this country. And I am a student of history, of African-American history, as well as in history in this country. And I wanted to go back to a comment that you made earlier. You were talking about the financial wealth of this country and where it came from. And I my question is this: do you think that it would help to change attitudes, or to at least create a paradigm shift if we were to promote a movement that actually brought forth documentation of the evidence of the fact that this country became the wealthiest country in the world, along with England and France, in a very short period of time, in less than 50 years, during the 1800s, as a result of free labor and cotton production and the proliferation of textile mills in United States, Great Britain, and France. Then, we see on public channel TV the highlight of the giants who built America: J.P. Morgan, Vanderbilt,
Yes.
Rockefeller, and others. But we don't hear about how African American, how their wealth was built on free labor either. Okay, do you think that if we were to bring forth these facts. And, you know, another thing is, do you think that the word fear that evolved from the plantation system, the white people feared Black rebellion, is really a euphemism for something else? Because see, the whites always had the firepower to put down any kind of rebellion. So I really don't think that they feared Black people to that extent. I think that fear is used to, I think it's much more insidious. Right. I think it's racism in this country is not so much about fear of Black people, it's about something else. What do you think that something else is?
It's great. You said a lot there. Yeah, I mean, so, you know, part of the resistance to, I think, making a more livable wage available throughout the country, and you know, the pardon the expression, but the BS around you know, a livable wage and raising the minimum wage has to do with that in the we benefited for centuries over free labor. You call it free, I call it violent, enforced, you know, and I know that's what you mean. It's like, right. I mean, you know, they don't, and the people in the South, they don't want to pay for labor. And I think this is some psychological artifact, if you will, some mental artifact of the way that things have been done for so long. And there's a book called Slavery and the Rise of American Capitalism that talks about exactly what you're talking about, Judith, right? They were mortgaging slaves in Louisiana. You know, you had credit default swaps.
Yeah, the credit system in this country was built on slavery.
Exactly. So absolutely, I agree with you. Everywhere we can. And that's primarily why I wanted to follow the money and show why the money went the way it did in shadow, right? And how it was systematically denied African Americans and Africans. I mean, this whole story, a lot of people don't even know about, you know, Black and white were more integrated in the early 1600s than they are now.
Yes.
Right. And so because white and Black indentured could buy their freedom. And then all of a sudden, guys like my uncle rigged the rules so that, all of a sudden Black is not freed from their indenture, even though they might have paid their indenture off. And of course, Tom and LaTanya are so eloquent and beautiful in the movie, talking about the impact of having ancestors who were manumitted in the late 1700s and what that has meant to their family today. So ultimately, what I hope people get is that what we're talking about, this America is about self-determination, living the life that you want to live. Ideally, every citizen should be able to live the life and have a reasonable shot at living the life they want to live. And we just completely, illegally, legally denied that in a violent way to African Americans. It's about self-determination. And that's what the Canadian pioneer story is about. It's a subtle theme, but when you have so many Americans that have benefited from the system as it exists, they're not going to give that up willingly. And see, this is the problem. I think this is the heart of what maybe you're talking about, Judith, is that they're not going to give it up willingly. And that's a function of generation upon generation, centuries of not dealing with this. And so it's, you know, I've had some folks, you know, there was an effort in the 60s to maybe take parts of North Carolina. Some of you on the Zoom may know this effort to for Black folks just to say, screw it, we're going to go form our own state. Everybody can come live there. And, you know, we're going to, I mean, Tulsa, right? We had it in Tulsa. And then they burned it to the ground and murdered everybody. They had prosperity. They had, you know, again, this Black folk are no different than white in terms of their abilities and what they can achieve. And they burned it to the ground. Right. So I whatever the Black-led movement comes up with, if they want to do something like that, I would support it. I mean, I would support a white tax, you know, tax me. tax me and let's get that community up and going. I mean, one of the proudest moments in the evolution of the film is its distribution is two African-American lawyers came to me, lady lawyer, one's a business person, one was a corporate attorney. They formed a group, and I hope you'll check it out. It's called the Together is Better Alliance. I think it's at togetherisbetteralliance.org. And they're actually getting white and black folk together and going to the museum in Montgomery, going to Atlanta, breaking bread together. But let's make no mistake. We got to out what you're talking about, Judith. And more importantly, we got to reverse that flow of money. It's really about money and denying generations upon generations of African Americans their fair shot at the American dream. And let's face it, this whole country was built on capitalism. It was great that, in England, you couldn't really rise unless you were part of the aristocracy. It's great what we did, right? In terms of, but it's a hollow victory if we don't acknowledge the foundational apartheid and the legal violence that was economic violence that was perpetuated against Africans and later African Americans. So let's transfer a bunch of money into the African American community, Black community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judith. Thank you, Francis. Sheila, before you go, I have a question in the chat from Stephanie Colon. Francis, this is the chat. Thank you for your informative documentary. Please, can you speak about the symbolism of ending the documentary the way you did? Do you have a message for the Black Americans in the room about the significance of your documentary in moving the question of reparation forward?
Well, it goes back to that, right? Thank you, Stephanie. It goes back to that. It goes back to a rising tide lifts all boats. So what I was trying to say in the end of the film was, what are we so afraid of with this equity, right? What are we so afraid of confronting this issue? And it really goes back to that psychology of, we're afraid if someone else gains, we're going to lose. If someone else gains, we're going to lose. But that's really elementary thinking, right? We need to make it a national priority to understand that if this rising tide lifts all boats, it has to include African Americans. And so I think, I've thought a lot about the ending to the film, and I might have been a little more hard hitting or advocated. Well, I did use the R word, which of course, because of the very calculated political campaign by people who are either intentionally racist or unconsciously racist, that reparations has somehow become a dirty word. We did this with Japanese Americans after World War II. We acknowledged their illegal criminal internment, and we gave each family $35,000. Now I know there's 40 million African American families, but we can figure out other ways. If we don't give them 30 to 33,000, we could do it over a certain period. But we've got to do that. We've absolutely got to do that.
Thank you.
I hope I'm moving that conversation, that narrative forward.
Thank you very much. We have Sheila, Seja, Colleen, and then we keep going. Sheila?
Good morning, Francis. I just, every now and then I have to get on and tell a guest how much I appreciate their work. And so I just had to tell you how much I appreciate your work. And I'm going to ditto what Sister Judith said in terms of your passion and how you wove your family story into the American story, which I think is a model for everyone. Like you were saying, a lot of times white people will say, well, my family didn't own slaves. I'm poor. I don't have it. I'm not getting any privilege. And they sort of just separate themselves from the American story. But, and it's maybe some work that I will do, come up with a workshop where people can really place themselves into it. Because I think that's part of it. People see it, that it's separate. They see racism as separate. That's the hooded guys over there. That's not,
Right.
And I had so many ahas, and then I do have a question, but one aha is something that you just spoke to. And I was like, oh, I was going to talk about that unity between the indentured servants, the whites and the blacks. And when I saw that, I said, that is the strength in our country, that unity, because every time, like with the Poor People's March, like with, every time there's been some show of unity, there has been a huge backlash,
Right.
And so it really struck me that something about that unity is part of our healing. It's not like the answer, but that's certainly part of it. And then the part, of course, I knew this history, but when 4 million enslaved people were told they were free, and it was like with nothing, they had built tremendous wealth. I mean, who could even calculate
Exactly right.
The monetary value of 4 million people working for free, for years. And I just, oh God, I just wept at that part, because I just can't even imagine, like, you're free and they were, yeah. So that was a real moment for me. And then I thought about a friend. I have a friend, Frances Kendall. I don't know if you know, she's done work around white privilege, and she's written a couple books. But she grew up in Waco, Texas, where my family is from. And I have a history of people who did day work or, service work. And her family was very wealthy. And she said, as a young child, her parents kept telling her, they're just not like us. They're not like us. And she said, even as a young girl, she said, well, why would you have someone in charge of me? Because her nanny, who you loved, the woman who cared for you, she just loved her so dearly. She said, well, if they're not like us, why would they be in charge of our lives? And she said, as a young child, she knew that there was something wrong with that. And so I thought of her in your film as well. But with all this uproar about critical race theory, which we know is just a code word for, we don't want to know our children to know the real history. In Facebook, someone said critical race theory equals history. It's like American history. That's just another word for, but how do you deal? And I mean, it's such a, so much anger about children learning this history. I just can't, and I do understand, I'm not gonna say I don't understand, but because, racism is encoded. I get it. It's in the DNA. If our country had a DNA like our bodies do, racism would be in the nucleus of the DNA. And that's why it's in everything. It's in the tissue, organs, it's in the body of this country. And, and I get that. But, parents, white parents, they do not want their children to learn this history. They don't want them to feel bad. And I'm like, you don't want them to feel bad. Try being Black for 67 years and dealing with, microaggressions on a daily basis, literally hundreds of microaggressions. Try dealing with, not getting jobs that you know good and well you were qualified for, being seated by the bathroom as you go into a restaurant, just hundreds. Try that and tell them you don't want your kids to feel bad, But anyway, I'm going on. I digress. But yeah, could you just speak to the whole critical race theory and this anger and fear that white parents have about their children learning American history? And again, thank you so much for your work. And I'm going to incorporate, I teach junior college and I teach a diversity class, and I'm going to incorporate your film into my class.
Great. Mm-hmm. Great. Gosh, you said so much, Sheila, and just so beautifully put, from everything from incorporating these people who don't think they're a part of the American story, or that they, that they don't understand how they benefited from it all the way through it. But I mean, this issue of critical race theory is such a joke. I mean, it was started by actually a former, or maybe current, documentary director who went on Fox, and wanted to rattle everybody's cages and started talking about critical race theory. And I mean, critical race theory is an academic term, and it's just about teaching the impacts of racism on our society. The truthful fact, okay, so if truth is perceptive, let's talk about facts, right? I mean, critical race theory is just facts. But what happens is, and again, I encourage people to watch my film Heist to learn about the deregulation of the media and the formation when we went from 60 media companies to 6. Then you had social media spring up to fill the void of actual journalism, and people who could shed, not just echo chamber like on Fox or even CNN or MSNBC, where you just have this, drawn along ideological lines. You actually have an independent, fact-based discussion about this whole thing of critical race theory is a joke. Some way to get that more mainstream and not allow people to take that issue and run with it, right? And use it as a divisive thing. And, because it really is just a concoction. But you speak of something even more endemic and more insidious, which is our school system, right? I mean, we have had, in addition to not being able to get the film in the South, we have not been able to get the film in, it's probably appropriate for 7th grade and up. We have tried with school systems. And none of them, they think the film is controversial, and they don't. So I knew this happened about 3 years ago, and because there was a woman not far from me in Tucson who wanted to put it in our local school system, and man, you should have seen it mirrored the pushback, right? But what I say to and of course, the actual history of our country is written in Texas into school books that a majority of our children see, and read and learn from. So I encourage every parent or grandparent on this Zoom, know what your child is being taught. There is no more powerful, more organized, or more turnkey ready group than the Parent Teachers Association, the PTA. It's like get in front of your school supervisor, your superintendent for your school system, saying this is ridiculous. You have power, and we need to. There are people that are trying to get the Texas School Book Commission. They're casting slavery as a states' rights issue, which is absurd, rather than the nationally critically important tragedy that it is. This critical race theory thing is nonsense, but thank you for bringing it up, and more endemic educational problems.
Thank you so very much. Just a quick reminder, we have a lot of people still wanting to ask questions. So remember to keep our comments and questions, to under a minute if possible. Okay.
I'll do that too.
Thank you. We have Seja, and then Colleen, and then Jack.
Hi, Francis. Thank you for bringing to light more and more history from the white family perspective. I struggle with reparations that appears or that singles out and puts ahead of other people. And that's going to sound bad, but it's how I have to say it, I guess, in a way that doesn't show equity for all who are in need. I feel that there are occasions all the time where people just reverse their jealousies and turn on someone else and create another way to be divided. I do support equity that, just as you said, lifts all boats, but I don't know, it doesn't sound like that's what is being discussed here. Yesterday, I heard an interview with John Mcwhorter. I believe his book is called Woke Racism. And I don't know if this would cover what we're talking about here or not, but the gist of it, without having read the book, for me was that maybe by saying here, I'm going to, like as a woman, allow you something more, and then you never can take credit for it yourself. I think having an educational opportunity through college, even PhD level, for all peoples would be great, because you still have to do your own work. And maybe childcare to support that as well would be great, but I don't understand. Not sure I see a benefit to other directly. Sorry.
Right. And thank you, Seja. I appreciate your honesty. I think it's great. I mean, this is why I made the movie, right? So what I'm trying to show, Seja, is that there was a specific wound that's never been compensated for, right? And people say, oh, well, there's more proportionally folks on wealth, Black folks on welfare, et cetera. Well, there are more folks on Black folks proportionally on welfare because of the reasons that I talk about. They need it more, right? So what I'm talking about is a specific wound that was done, that our nation did over several generations, that we have never compensated on par with what we did, for instance, to the Japanese Americans or for the Japanese Americans. And so to me, it's different. Yes, we need to do things for poor white Americans. We need to make labor law more fair. We need to raise the minimum wage. But we're talking about a group of folks who were forcibly brought here against their will, sold into, and you can talk about, the folks in Africa sold their own tribe, their enemies into slavery. We can have, the bottom line is we had an orchestrated effort to forcibly, violently bring Africans to this country. And then we not only forcibly enslaved them, we kept rigging the laws against them, much like we rigged the laws in Japan or against the Japanese, the unlawful internment of Japanese during World War II, right? So this has been a concerted effort, planning, implementation, strategy, purposeful, based on and that impacts the folks that are on this call that were ancestors. Their ancestors were and they themselves, their communities, have been intentionally discriminated against. A poor white person might have the effects of having someone who didn't go to college, or someone who maybe had a choice to do things or didn't, or maybe they didn't have a choice. They just kind of, unlike me, drew I drew the lucky sperm card, right? It's like, so I think it's a different thing when you talk about helping and making our system more equitable. This is a special example. For instance, what's happened with the genocide perpetuated against Native Americans, First Nations folks, right? Terrible violence, absolutely. But there was some compensation, even though it was done not very well. I actually work with a tribe near me, the Tohono O'odham Nation, and they have revenue from casinos, right? I don't think there's anything like that in the Latino community. But you start to see the self-determination of the First Nations people. But this is I would argue that it is different. It's very much different between a poor white person and the system not benefiting them. We need to work on that. I agree with that. But what's happened to African Americans and their ancestors, it's never been done anywhere. And it needs to be like any bill that comes due for lack of payment. And just like Judith was talking about, they had forced labor, free labor. They were forced to provide their labor for generations without any compensation. And then when we finally freed them, we took back the 40 acres and a mule. I mean, this is just, to me, it's kind of a clear-cut case of right and wrong and differences between being white in this country and being African American. I mean, because those legacies, those economic legacies, are still impacting Black communities at a disproportionate rate than they are white communities.
So you're proposing a bill then of some sort be passed to reimburse people?
Absolutely. Or do it locally, state, but absolutely federal. Have it be I'm happy to pay a reparations tax. We pay a tax for, whatever we pay taxes for, that get singled out. I think as a nation, I would like to see us get to the point where we say, listen, we violently forced these people to provide us their labor. That impacted me. If you have any investment in the stock market or in insurance companies or anything like that, chances are you've benefited. So yeah, absolutely. We need to talk about it, but it's easy to do. we just, we can't maybe, I think somebody put a figure of 35 trillion or something, maybe Robert Johnson, the chairman of BET. But let's do it over generations, but let's start right away. That's my opinion. And you may disagree, and that is America. And that's great. But I think in this instance, it's justice.
Yeah.
Okay. Great question. Thank you.
Great question. Great question. Wow, how time is flying. We have Colleen and Jack and then Tina. Now, because we are coming closer to the end of the show, let's again keep the questions and or comments succinct.
Right. Sorry.
So Francis, thanks. This is Colleen. Thanks for your terrific work. But I want to ask you to reflect a little. What do you think you lost because you didn't know this history? And what is propelling you now?
What did I lose? I needed to confront, I think, Colleen, it's a great question. What a great group. I think I would have confronted my own unconscious racism, my tribalism, because the film taught me a lot. I learned a lot in the course of my, not only about the nation's history and about the history of Africans and later African Americans here, but I think I would have confronted my own kind of sense of tribalism. And I think I, as I said in my earlier comments, I felt this injustice, but I think I would have, I just continue to need to confront my own sense of my comfortableness. And I wish I would have done that earlier. Also, I live in I live in a predominantly white community, and that really bothers me. And I'm working on trying to change that. But stuff like that, so that's what I lost, being born into this. I am a working girl. I don't live off of any inherited wealth. And so that keeps me on my toes. But yeah, no, it's a great question. I think I need to continue to always scan my thoughts for what I'm thinking and making sure that I make up for any lost time. Thank you.
Great question, Colleen. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have Jack and Tina. Dean, I sent you a chat. I don't know if you have your hand down now. And sorry, Robert and Joe, I'm going to have to end the Q&A with Thaddeus because we're just running out of time. Sorry about that, my brothers.
I'll stay another. I'm actually in the midst of editing my new film. I'm making a new film on PTSD in the military. And we're looking at the Black Veterans Project in that movie. But I can stay an extra 5 minutes or so. My editor's texting me furiously, but I can, I'd hate to not get to questions that folks really wanted to ask, but that's up to you. I'm not directing, you are.
Thank you. We have Jack and then Tina.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to say thank you for bringing Gerald Horne to the fore. I think he's so important and more of us need to really know about him.
Yes.
Out of all the things I could ask, I really wanted to know if you have any thoughts about doing another project about that terrible story at the Lockheed plant in Meridian, Mississippi. Not in 1913, but in 2013.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wonderful question. It does, Jack. It begs a follow-up. I was so taken by Mr. Willis's life. And his courage to confront his white managers who also were afraid of Doug Williams. It's actually not a bad idea. I'll put that one on the burner and see what happens. The family is so beautiful, and they lost their mom just 3 weeks after Mr. Willis died, and but the forces that worked there, from the effort to, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, that's the real story too. It was a workplace accident. The kind of dynamics. Mississippi, as Miss Simone said, goddamn Mississippi. Goddamn Mississippi. So yes, it's a great story idea, and thank you for it. I'll think about that some more.
Thank you, Jack. Tina.
Thank you. You growing up, you had some sort of tipping point where you went from seeing, oh, these Black people take care of me as opposed to their own kids, and other people have alluded to they never had that realization. They went, this is just the way it is. This is what these people, So as someone who's thinks a lot like how I can help other people reach a tipping point of seeing that this is an issue, what in your experience what do you think brought the tipping point on for you? You just more introspective or something? Or what brought on the tipping point for you, and how can we help other white people, reach that tipping point to counter this backlash that we keep hitting up against?
Right, and it's and each person you encounter that needs some erudition, or on this subject, it's different. Every person's different, is like their thumbprint, their fingerprints, right, in terms of approach and how you do that. I mean, for me, it was just the tipping point was it broke my heart. But I also came from I don't think any of my relatives are on this call, but a very dysfunctional family. I came from a broken childhood, and parents divorced and pain. There was a lot of pain, even though we were privileged. I mean, there was a lot of pain, a lot of addiction. And I just was always kind of a thoughtful little kid, and so, and I was always sensitive, I guess, and I still suffer from being too sensitive. And so the tipping point for me also was justice. And also, and this goes back to, I think, what Colleen said, in terms of growing and how do I grow from this? And how do I use my skill set to be useful? I mean, I really, people say, what do? I'm just trying to be useful. Right. And that's something that's, was congenital to me. And I think for most of the folks on this call, and there's a kind of a fire that burns because I even though I came from privilege, I felt like there were some things that just weren't right in my own life, that I was this kind of smart, sensitive kid, and nobody really saw that. And I was a loner, and it just, so I think in some ways trying to be useful is to proving to folks, and even my parents or my family, that I am useful. It's deep psychological stuff here, but it's like, I constantly, I feel such gratitude on one level for coming from and having the opportunities that I have, but it's just a daily reprieve, that I've got to be, I think about Rockefeller, whoever said it, I'm not going to think about how much money I made, but what experiences I had and the lives that I touched and maybe helped, and certainly those people who helped me. And I felt this huge debt to these folks in my life growing up who worked for our families, because I obviously didn't see them as people who worked for us. I connected with them on a heart level in a way that I was not able to do or was not offered to me as a child, coming from a prominent, at times wealthy, not wealthy, white WASP family, that at times could be very cold. So I'm just trying to be useful. And that drives me most days. I'm actually trying to, in editing this film I'm working on, I'm like, oh gosh, I've just been making films solidly since 2006, which is a great problem to have if you're a documentarian, but I'm trying to not be quite so hard on myself and not try to prove my worth every single day. But generally that's how I wake up.
Thank you, Frances.
I don't know if I answered your question. I hope I did.
Thaddeus, welcome to the program, and you have the last question.
Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Frances, for an excellent film. To what extent were you exposed to and or aware of the Daughters of the Confederacy while growing up? And have you uncovered their ongoing influence on rewriting history in favor of the lost cause of the Confederacy? That's a great
subject for a movie too. My family was in the DAR, you name it, they were in it. They were in the white country clubs, all of that stuff. But that's the first I've heard of that, Thaddeus, and thinking about how they are trying to rewrite history. I've been asked to join things like that, and I have to kind of apprise them of where I'm truly coming from. again, this lost cause, this is magical. Getting back to the mind, the mind behind racism, or it's magical thinking. So much of unconscious white thinking about this, our history, is magical, not real thinking. It's like when I went to my family home place in Virginia, and my cousin who still lives there, which is why I didn't really name it in the film. She said, "Oh, I said, well, where are the formerly enslaved buried?" And she said, "Oh, they're over there," and it was overgrown. And, and those, she said, those are the slaves that, chose to stay with the Pendletons. Well, they didn't choose to stay with the Pendletons. It was either that or starve to death. Right. And so I kind of have that type of straight talk, blunt talk with the DAR, in terms of you are seeing what you want to see, and probably most of what you're writing about didn't take place. And it's time we set things straight. And so I'm going to continue to do that for the rest of my life. And Tina, I hope I answered your question about the tipping point. I hope each and every person has their own tipping point and devotes their time and resources to it. There's no greater cause, no true cause than trying to change this, because it infects every aspect of our society.
Thank you so very much. That is a great question. Great questions from everyone, even in the chats as well. Frances Causey, thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you.
Wonderful episode, as I knew it would be. Lane, I'm going to turn it over to you before you turn it back over to me.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to you really quick. Just, Frances, thank you very much for the work. I did put Nick's email in the chat for people who want to get this access to this film for your organization. We did pay for this, so we would like you to know that you will be asked to give a donation to get access to this film. All right, and well worth it. So thank you.
And know that money has already been turned around into a reparations grant. We're not taking any proceeds from this for ourselves personally.
Thank you so very much. Whew. Okay, just really fast before we close this out. This is just a quick reminder that we have our What's Ours to Do workshop coming up on December 11th. From 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can register for that workshop at our website, racetalkrevolution.com. Again, that's racetalkrevolution.com, events/events. Room is limited to 22, and there's still a little bit of room left, so you want to make sure that you do that. The investment on that, the tuition, is only $50. It's going to be a beautiful, magical time. Some of you probably.
Can I just thank you and Lane for doing this? This has been a great group, super turnout. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to meet you all. Thank you.
Of course you can thank us.
I know a lot of work goes into this.
Thank you so much.
Please come back. And guys, if you haven't seen that film yet, our link is up through Friday. All right. So you can to go to that link that I put in the chat and still watch the movie. And well, you should. Just thanks for the work you do.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask Nick to extend that through the weekend. And know that if your group is not able to do a licensing fee, that again, we would turn around. We can try to do a sliding scale. The ultimate thing is we really want folks to see this movie. Sometimes, not with groups like this that are highly motivated, but sometimes the fee gets folks more motivated to promote it. I mean, that's really what's behind all that, and also the grant. So anyway, thank you.
Yeah. In fact, that was going to be my last thing is it is a powerful film. So we encourage you all to see it. And if you've seen it once, then tell a friend. All right. It's important work.
And Frances, let me say that I'm interested in doing a working group on that workbook. So we're going to go out to Nick and get that as well. Yes.
Great. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a wonderful study guide. It's about 30 pages long. And it really takes you through really 7th grade up all the way through college, beyond that, adults and whatever. It's a really valuable tool. I hope you'll find it such.
And
All
real
right.
fast, Marcy asks a question. Can people share the link?
Yes, I think absolutely. I think I'm just texting Nick to extend it through Sunday. So I think probably the link will expire on Sunday. But again, reach out to Nick for access beyond that.
All righty.
All right, everybody.
It's also on Tubi. It was free on Amazon Prime, and they just tacked a rental fee on it, $2.99. But if you put in your search bar, Google Watch the Long Shadow, and make sure it's the documentary, because there's a feature also named Scripted Piece. I think there's still some free ways to watch it. Yeah.
All righty. Family, thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the afternoon, rest of the day, and have a great weekend.
Take care,
Love you,
everybody.
everybody. Take care.
Oh, it's a great group.